Well, good morning, fellow Patreon members, fellow Patriots, on this Super Bowl Sunday. As the day gets underway, we've got some nice weather. The warm up continues. I did put up a number of posts since yesterday and follow ups to those this morning. So you might, if you missed them last night, uh, particularly check out the one where I kind of really go into the issues, the deep issues regarding the long range with respect to the snow issues that exist along I-95 from about Philadelphia to Boston. The snow hole that we've been talking about. I have to tell you, I mean, looking at everything over the last couple of days, looking at what models have been doing, teleconnections have been doing, and just the general feel for things. Here we are at February 3rd. I know I'm going to get a lot of blowback from this and from the snow weenie group, particularly the more militant ones. You could, and I saw some blowback being directed to a few weather people out there that have dared to even suggest that the winter may very well be winding down earlier as opposed to later, like we've seen in past seasons. And look, I will go back and just say this: last February, when a number of people, myself included, kind of in the midst of the really deep warm pattern that we were in, that developed at the end of January, had the audacity to suggest that perhaps we were going to see a pattern change around the latter part of late February, and that it would lead to a pretty bullish March. And the blowback I got then was, insane. And of course, all those people went remarkably silent since then. So now I'm sure I'm going to get the opposite blowback. I really don't care, honestly, to tell you the truth. It is what it is. I'm not going to tailor my forecast in order to suit the egos of those that are out there that have hidden agendas, whatever those agendas happen to be. It's my opinion. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll admit it. Uh, but right now, from what I'm seeing, it really, really stretches the imagination to see how we're going to get any kind of pattern change in order to favor a cold and snowier pattern for the snow lovers. I think at best, what we're going to be seeing from here on in, unless there's some monumental earthquake in the upper air, as far as the pattern is concerned, uh, I, uh, 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 I think what we're going to see going forward is uh, a situation like we saw a lot of during the 70s, 80s, and even in the 90s. And I've said this a few times how, at least to me, looking at the kind of weather we've had this winter, plus just the general sense of what the upper air has, how it's behaving, this really feels like it did in a lot of the down winters in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I think what will probably happen over the next couple of weeks and possibly into the first part of March is you're going to probably have these opportunities where cold air comes in as you're getting some kind of storm action somewhere, and that's really sort of the only. I honestly think that that's going to be probably the only way that we're going to wind up seeing any kind of accumulating snow inside the snow hole. As far as the areas outside the snow hole, which is, pretty much go north and west of 95 up the Hudson Valley and up into northeastern PA and into interior New England, your chances are going to be what they've been all winter, because that's where the snow has been falling, and that's just the way I don't think it's going to change that. The other area on the opposite direction is the fact that you're seeing, we saw the snows that actually have been heavier down in the Baltimore, D.C., Washington, D.C. I'm sorry, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and down in through Virginia and western parts of North Carolina, and the neighboring areas, perhaps on the other side of the mountains. Uh, you know, I, you're probably going to see again from it's going to have to start timing out perfectly. I just don't see how we're going to get into some sort of bowling alley nonstop pattern as far as cold and snow is concerned. So it's really going to just boil down to uh, perfect timing, having things at the right place at the right time, and that's it. So let's get going with everything that's happening this morning. Weather-wise, there's a lot of action out in the west. You're going to see. I'm going to show you a couple of things with respect to the satellites that will really illustrate what I was trying to get to last night. First of all, snow lovers, if you want snow, you got to go west, and you got to go west in a big way with your mountain, with your mountain climbing stuff and equipment, because it's really there up in through the Sierra Nevadas, where we've got 72-hour snowfalls right now of 30, 36 inches up and down the mountain chain to the eastern part of California. This is a result of the big storm that has moved into California, and the very busy satellite that we see out in the west. And also, we've had some fair amount of snows up through Idaho and Montana here. You can run some 6, 8, and even some isolated 12-inch amounts. And of course, that snow is going to be spreading eastward across the plains, and that's where we have all the winter storm warnings that are up. And also, you can look at the last 72 hours where the snowfall has been. This was the warm advection snow as the bitter cold air began to pull out, and what it produced in this very narrow band that ran from Philadelphia on the northern end to just south of Washington, D.C. on the southern end. And it was basically a coating to a couple of inches inside that band with those higher amounts in West Virginia. And the lake effect issues, this is only through 72 hours, so probably could add another day to those numbers up in north central New York with the stuff that came in off of Lake Ontario that we watched on the radar that was pretty unrelenting for so long. So here's the watches and warnings this morning across the U.S. We've got winter storm warnings up and down, still continuing in the Sierra Nevadas, and also spreading to the western part of California and on into southern Oregon. And we've got advisories for inland areas now, and there'll probably be some more coming here as we go through the day and into tonight and tomorrow. Meantime, this east-west area of winter storm warnings that covers eastern Idaho, virtually the whole state of Montana, North Dakota, and northwestern Minnesota, because that's where really all the cold air is at the moment. The winter weather advisories that you see in parts of upstate New York, a lot of that has to do with black ice issues because of the rapid warming and the rising relative humidity at low levels. Plus, we had temperatures that were still down in the teens and single digits in many areas in upstate New York, and actually not that far even from the warmer urban centers this morning. But with the sun out now, and we're pretty much above freezing, at least for most of the downstate areas, should be pretty much above freezing. That issue is gone. So here's the surface map this morning. Warmer air, of course, obviously has taken over. You've got a stationary frontal boundary that runs through upstate New York, north of Albany, south of Glens Falls, and then carries across the Great Lakes. So the warming, look at Chicago, which was at double digits, 20 degrees plus below zero. Now, overnight at 3 a.m., they were sitting in the low 40s. I mean, that's just insane. The change to how it feels on the body must be really bizarre. As soon as you go from minus 20 to zero, you probably already feel the warmth. But now the big radical change. So that's a 60 plus degree change in temperature in about in 2.5, 3 days time. The cold air remains in place across the Dakotas, back through northern Minnesota, in through Montana. So you can see where all the winter storm warnings have been set up. And of course, that boundary between the Arctic air and the non-Arctic air uh, reaches through western Montana and then snakes along the Canadian border north of the Washington state Canadian border and on up the coast. There's been a lot of heavy rain and snow into the west and in the Canadian west because of the fact that you've got this trough and this in the west, the upper trough in the west. And here's the low. It's weakened now. It's up to a 995 low, but it came in just about reached land as less than a 980 late yesterday afternoon. So we're seeing that energy beginning to weaken and also being kicked out ahead as we start to set up the issues for the east later this week. But there's another low upstream that with an upper feature that's going to be dropping southward. Trying to see where it's analyzed. There's your high. So it's got a low that's analyzed here, but I'm just trying to figure out because you do have this strong upper low that's coming down, bring and on the Pacific satellite loop. Oh, I see what. Okay, so that was yesterday's the first upper low. So it's that low center that was out on the surface map to the east of Oregon. So that makes sense. Uh, Yesterday, that upper low was way up, and I guess I didn't account for the fact that it's moving southeastward. But you can see the first system is inland now. The upper support is inland, and also still has the definition, that comma shaped swirl to it. And then you've got the second upper low that's dropping down southward, and that is going to continue all the winter conditions that you're seeing out there in the west. Here's the radar this morning out west. Not as active as it was yesterday, but you're still getting that. The snows out in the Sierra Nevadas just continues. It's this kind of wall that goes on and on. More showers coming into northwestern California. We've got some precip down into Arizona, some showers there. And then we go back up to the north, and the radar looks pretty busy across much of northern Montana and in northern half of Montana and heading up into North Dakota. Not a whole lot going on at all in the east. We'll take it down to the southeast where we've got showers off the Carolinas. Showers and maybe a couple of thunderstorms rolling off the southeast coast there of Georgia. And the weather across Florida, except up in the Panhandle, the weather across Florida looks pretty good for it today. So there's your Pacific loop. And obviously, you've got a deep trough out here in the west. No question. In the meantime, I want to take a look at this is the Atlantic view from off the Florida coast. And this kind of says it. This is one of the big problems with respect to the upper air pattern that going forward. Uh, the Atlantic, a lot of attention, of course, is focused on the Atlantic, and I get that. I'm sorry, on the Pacific, and that's the Pacific is a huge player in all of this. But sometimes we have to remember to look on the Atlantic side, and you've got a big upper air problem in the Atlantic as well as the one in the Pacific, and that's this whole screaming jet. Notice the clouds off the Atlantic coast. They're just pretty much running from west to east. There's really no feature there that even suggests that there's a storm of some kind sitting out there, either just south of Bermuda, but somewhere out in the South Atlantic. There's nothing going on. It's just this sort of straight west to east flow until you get about 3/4 of the way across, and then you run into a system that is south of, I guess it splits it out south of the Azores, somewhere out here, and you start to see the clouds kind of turn up to the northeast. You need some action out there in the Atlantic side to kind of back things up a little bit, and it's just an absolute lack of activity here. All the clouds really kind of blowing from west to east. So if you get a situation where you have, say, a low off the southeast coast, you actually do have a weak one there this morning. There's nothing out in the Atlantic that would force that low to come up the coast at all. It's a wide open alleyway for the weather system to just get into that jet and move to the east and then into the northeast and just move northeastward into the North Atlantic Ocean storm graveyard, and that's it. And that's an issue, and that's something that doesn't show a whole lot of change in the next week or 10 days or maybe even longer than that. And in the meantime, if you look out on the edge of the full disk loop here on the Pacific, you see how busy it is with that low rotating up off the California coast. You can kind of make out there's one behind it, and also the moisture that's coming in on the southern part of that jet that is streaming into California and into the southwest. So the upper trough, deepening upper trough in the west, ridge in the east. See the arc of clouds over the northern Great Lakes there. So that kind of shows you that there's ridging going on in the eastern part of the United States. Not necessarily a strong ridge, but enough of a ridge where it's creating the warm up that we're seeing. More importantly, there's nothing that uh, kept this cold upper low in and kept it in here. Okay, so here at this point, if you had some kind of blocking going on, where it would have forced that upper low to just kind of lift, move up into Labrador, and maybe another arm would rotate around to bring reinforcing shots of cold air. Not the case. This completely lifted out. Flat ridge here in the east. You can see the trough this morning from Kentucky down through the eastern Gulf states. So that's going to get kicked out off the southeast coast. And again, there's nothing to bring it up here because it's basically a straight line going out into the Atlantic. And now you've got the trough in the west deepening. So the issue with regards to the weather for the second half of the week is, even though you're going to be in a bit of a ridge position, which means the air aloft is going to be warm, the bottom part of the atmosphere might be a different story, and that is going to be one of the tricky parts of the forecast for the interior, certainly the interior areas of the Northeast. And I think that there's even a chance that you could see, the low-level cold air bleed pretty far south into toward New York City, or even south of New York City. Maybe not quite down to southern New Jersey or to southern PA, but it might perhaps get down to about 40 degrees north, and that could create some freezing rain issues for the middle part of the week. The trough, part of it comes out for late week, takes a low on up into New England, and then of course what happens after that? You still got the trough in the west and a flat ridge in the east, upper high that's sitting over Florida. So the flow, if you follow the height lines from Hawaii down south of, going from west to east, so your jet stream from Hawaii eastward, and then it turns northeast into the west coast of Florida, where you've got, I'm sorry, the west coast of the U.S., where you got this deep trough, and then on up northeastward from there through the plains and into the east coast. There is a polar connection that runs from northern Canada down to Lake Winnipeg and then swings up into eastern Canada, right down along the Canadian U.S. border. So there will be low-level cold air nearby. The question is whether it will be able to drain southward. And as far as opportunities going forward with respect to snow, and I said it from the beginning, or at the beginning of this, is you're going to have that perfect timing where weather systems are coming east and you get that connection, that cold air connection to the north, which allows cold air to intrude. And you'll see next weekend, for example, where the models just kind of strengthen the vortex in eastern Canada. So we have this moment, the moment lasts maybe a few days, where you do have the colder air coming in. But the question then is, where the weather system is going to be at this point. If you don't time out the development of a colder flow from Canada with a weather system coming along, then you've got a problem. And you'll notice as we move through, now we're at towards Valentine's Day, what's happening? Let's back it up. That trough in the east is lifting out. There's no blocking to hold it in. And suddenly you're back to a trough in the west, ridge in the east. And this is at day 11 and 12. It's not even at the end of the period. It's day 11 and 12. Trough in the west, ridge in the east. And then as we go through time, you start to see, again, that opportunity that might show up at some point where you get this cold intrusion. But I got to tell you, folks, looking at an upper air like this, it's just ugly. It really is, and it's hard to really grasp any kind of hope out of this. And I look, I understand when you say, the models change, and one day it has this, and one day it has that. I got to tell you, one of the things that I've noticed, particularly with the European model, and less even so with the GFS, it seems that whenever they go to this idea of a trough in the West, and once they get it in their teeth, they don't let go of it. And the long-range GFS models for the last week or so have been, or even before that, were they kept going to this trough in the west toward the end of the period, and I just kind of looked at it when it was coming out and sort of just ignored it. But then I started, you start to see it more and more. It just seems like when it comes to the stuff, when it goes to the west, when it shows it, it winds up happening. And the European also, I think, lends to the same argument, where you're going to have the primary pattern is going to be more in the west, the trough more in the west than in the east, and you're going to just have to wait for opportunities for colder air to intrude. Now that said, if you're in the west, you're happy as a clam, because this is going to be a very active, busy pattern for snow and storminess in the western part of the United States, going forward at least in the next couple of weeks. We here in the east are going to have to deal with whatever intrusions that we get. So let's go to the new NAM. The new NAM is only out to 42 hours. But you can at least get a flavor for where things are going here. Of course, there's your low off the southeast coast, and it just kind of meanders there. The flow in the Atlantic, the South Atlantic, is so weak that it takes a while for this thing to get out of the way. But again, there's nothing out there to kind of make it want to go up the coast, and there's nothing out to the west, any kind of deep trough that wants to lift it up. So it's just going to meander out there and move out. This is Tuesday morning as the front is approaching, and we'll be moving through. So I think we're going to see temperatures well up into the 50s. It might be one of these deals where the front comes through around midday, but the colder air really sort of waits until afterward and comes in tomorrow, Tuesday night, into Wednesday morning. And by the way, here are, you can see out in the west, continued action here with that next upper air system and low pressure moving inland with more rain and snow for the areas from the Rockies on westward, as that trough gets established into the west. So here's what we're looking for. And I'm not, run to run is a little difficult, because each, especially seems like lately the 6Z run for the 0 and 6Z run seem to be warmer than the 12 and 18. I don't know what's going on with that, but here's what we'll be looking for. And I just jumped off to the GFS, where we've got this front that's coming through in the east. You can see this big high that's up north of Montana is spreading out. This is the one factor in all of this, and I think it's reflected in the teleconnections from the last couple of days, showing that strongly negative EPO, East Pacific Oscillation. And what that is doing is that it is allowing for colder air at the lower levels of the atmosphere. It's reflecting that. But on the other hand, you've got that off-the-wall negative Pacific North America index, which would be ridge in the east, deep trough in the west. And as a result, you're seeing the upper levels being warmer than average. So here's what you're going to look at. We're going to be looking at going forward is how this cold air spreads out and its impact. So this is Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. And again, it seems as if the overnight model runs tend to have been trending warmer than the dayside runs, but you're going to have the weight of low-level cold air to the north, albeit shallow, and a series of systems coming in along the southern stream. So here's the first one. And I know it kind of looks warm here with rain, but I think you can make a case for that colder air to be more important and further south. And then you have this second wave that comes out. And, one of the things in this is that you're going to need a flatter look and weaker lows coming out, because if you wind up with one of these lows, as the European was implying for quite a while, where you were going to get this deep low, one of these waves becomes deeper and runs up into the Great Lakes instead of just kind of staying flat and meandering its way toward the east, which has been the GFS's argument. Then you're going to wind up with mostly rain. And here on the overnight, you've got the low that's lifting up toward Detroit, the primary low. Then it hits that big high, kind of comes to a grinding halt and starts to translate eastward. But by this time, you've got all this warm air that has, pushed the ice line well up into upstate New York. But we'll see how how this ultimately winds up playing, because again, I think there's room here for models to maneuver. And then, of course, finally, when the cold air does get in, what happens? The last wave moves out, goes goodbye. There's nothing, no moisture left for it to work on. And what do we get? Cold and dry coming in for next weekend until the next system comes out. And of course, no blocking, no nothing. And we wind up in the long range anyway, taking a load of the lakes, cold and dry after that. This, folks, was the 70s. This was the 80s. This was the 90s over a large majority of the winter seasons, uh, except for a handful. This is how it was for a lot of the time. And if you are, I think the worst of it was probably 1996, 97 to 99, 2000, because there were 4 winters in a row where the snow totals for the winter were, for much of the area from Washington to Boston, for much of that zone, the seasonal snowfalls were 60, 70, 80%, even 90% below normal. So this is just not a good pattern that's conducive to any kind of either prolonged cold or opportunities for snow. Again, I think you're going to just have to wait. It's going to, with regards to your chances, it's going to have to be almost perfect combination of cold air coming down from the north. Oh, you know what? I wanted to just double check before I come back to the screen here. I did set up the teleconnections and they hadn't updated. Sometimes they update by 9 o'clock. Sometimes they update after 10 or 11. Sometimes the folks at WPC take the day off. But these are the ones from yesterday. And there's your PNA. There, your Pacific North America Index. There is your strong, a deep trough in the west, ridge in the east, and it's off the wall, by the way. So that's really stretched to as far as you can stretch it. And the EPO, which is strongly negative. You know what we should look for? This just kind of came to mind and it'll happen. You can see this rapid ascent from the deep negative levels up, but it's still deeply negative from February 10th to the 15th. So when we look at these teleconnections every day, look for the time that you're going to see this sort of rapid ascent to the zero line. Okay, if we see something like that, then we can at least focus our attention on a date, a time frame where something could happen. The EPO does it from right around February 16th ish, where it goes from strongly negative to right toward the neutral line. And the NAO, which I think is pretty much a non-player right now, is just a slightly positive, trending toward the neutral line. But let's watch how the teleconnections evolve over the next several days to see if we can gain a little bit of a clue as to when we'll see perhaps a run toward the neutral zone on that off the wall PNA, because that's when you have, when you're seeing something like that going from a deep negative to zero or from a strong positive to zero. So that's telling you big temperature change. All right. So the trough in the west would be weakening, the ridge in the east. I'm sorry, the trough in the west would be weakening, the ridge in the east would be weakening, and perhaps going to a brief moment where we're opposite of that. And remember, there's a lot of geography that it takes into account, the calculations of some of these teleconnection indices. So you could have them in general be in a favorable pattern for you, but then you have to really look at where those pressure changes are uh, to to make sure that it works for you, because we had the NAO. The NAO can be negative, but it could be the wrong kind of NAO. It could be an east-based NAO. It could be in the form of a ridge up in the Atlantic rather than a blocking scenario. So it's really important that you kind of look at what exactly are these numbers telling you, because they're very, very broad. They cover, again, a large area of geography, and it makes a huge difference if you've got a ridge in one spot versus a ridge in the other. So I see you guys are on here. Uh, Mr. Briller, with the stats of DC, is only 2 inches from average for the whole winter, and they still got time. Um, uh, 15, 16, and 11, 12, John Trabacchino. That's actually, not a bad analogy because we have, in a lot of ways, we've got this weak El Nino going on, but in a lot of ways, a few people have pointed out that look at this stuff really close that the winter is actually behaving more like a La Nina winter than an El Nino winter. So there's obviously other things in play, and this is where at least you guys, you've got a leg up now that you've got, on the idea that you can't point to any one of these uh, indicators as silver bullets with regards to, okay, so we have this negative NAO, therefore it means this, and it means this every single time. And the answer, of course, to that is no. We have an El Nino, so that means, up until many years ago, up until not that many years ago, going back to the 50 El Nino, the super El Nino winter of 15, 16, it was kind of decided that you couldn't get a big snowstorm in the east when you were under those conditions. And guess what? You had a pattern relaxation for 3 weeks in the middle of January that produced one of the biggest snowstorms, 24-hour snowstorms that the northern mid-Atlantic and southern areas of the Northeast has ever seen. Of course, that didn't take away from the fact that the rest of the winter, for the most part, except for some areas along the immediate coast, was not a big snow winter at all. And it did behave the way a normal El Nino would behave, but there were exceptions. So that's why you have to be really careful when you make these broad assumptions. So Norma Belshaw, Timothy Veltman, Scott Briller, Mark Glatfelter, and we've got John Trabacchino on this morning. I'm just trying to make sure I give a big hello to everybody here. So look, there's a lot of stuff that I put up on Patreon from last night. So if you haven't caught up, go back and take a look at those long range posts that kind of break the upper air down, and also gets into a little bit of what I think might happen for the middle part of this week. The NAM has been running consistently colder than the other models, and yet at the same time, I want to be kind of careful because, well, the NAM has done that a few times this winter, and it hasn't worked out all that well. And in other times, there have been instances where it has actually done a much better job in the profile of the low level temperatures. The GFS as is usual tends to be over too warm, so I would be very careful with what it produces. And we'll see what happens later today when we get the next run of weather models. But it's Super Bowl Sunday, so I think a lot of you guys are going to be and gals are going to be football consumed. So that's fine. I'll probably sneak in a couple of posts, maybe later today, and just take it from there. I'm not going to do a separate YouTube live stream. Instead, what I'll do is I'll just this video is unlisted, so I'll wait a couple of hours and then maybe make it public for everybody else this afternoon. So a little bit of a freebie for non-Patreon members, and that'll be it. So this way everybody can kind of enjoy themselves. There really isn't anything too pressing. If there were a snowstorm threatening for the middle part of the week, I would, definitely be doing something. But I also got to take the opportunities to take a bit of a break. Yeah, so I'm thinking, Timothy, I'm not going to do um, a public stream this morning. It's not really that much anything different that I'm going to be able to say on it that I hadn't said already. So I'm gonna wait till about 11 o'clock or noon, and I'll put this out. I'll put this live stream out publicly and put it on the app as well, and that'll carry on for the rest of the day. Gary Brown, welcome aboard. Nice to see you. We picked up a few new Patreon members overnight. So hopefully they will be making their appearance somewhere along the way. Hope they jump on the chat here on the videos. It's always good to have a lot of company here and to have everybody on. And I certainly have a great time with you guys. So this has all been a very positive experience. And anyway, my neck, by the way, is much better. So I had one minor attack on Friday where it kind of it was more than a minor attack where it got a little crazy, but it's been pretty good since then. So hopefully, I have a doctor's visit tomorrow morning to my buddy the chiropractor, and he'll maybe snap it right in, and that'll be that. All right. So look, everybody have a great day. Enjoy your Super Bowl parties, or if you're giving Super Bowl parties, I hope they're a big success. And we'll put some stuff up a bit later on.